The desert was endless. The sun burned like a giant fire above the golden dunes. Wind howled across the sand, carrying heat and silence together. Nothing moved for miles. No birds, no animals. Only the sound of sand shifting like whispers of ghosts. Beneath that silent desert, a young alien girl lay hidden. Only her glowing eyes showed faintly through the thin layer of dust. Her skin was pale and cracked, covered with dry grains. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. She had been left there, left to die under the burning sky. She could still remember their voices. The people she once called her clan. They had stood around her, their faces cold, their hands pressing her down into the pit. Unfit, they had called her. Weak. They buried her alive because she was born different. She begged them to stop. She cried. But they walked away. The sound of their boots faded until only silence remained. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The heat became fire on her skin. Her small chest rose and fell slower with every breath. She closed her eyes. Maybe this was the end. Maybe the desert would take her and no one would ever know she had existed. But far away another sound appeared. A low rumble, faint at first, then stronger. A machine, a vehicle. A lone human man drove an old crawler across the dunes. He was a scavenger, searching for lost metal and broken tech buried in the sand. His face was covered with a dusty mask. His name was Jalen. He had been alone in the desert for many weeks. As he passed a tall dune, something caught his eye. Just a small flicker like the glint of glass in sunlight. He slowed the crawler. He stood still, the hot wind pulling at his coat. There it was again, two faint glowing dots peeking from the sand. He climbed down and walked carefully. Could be scrap. Could be a trap. Many things in the desert were dangerous, but something about the light felt alive. He knelt and brushed away the sand with his glove. A patch of cracked gray skin appeared. He froze. Skin, hey, are you alive? He whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear. He dug faster, hands shaking. Sand poured away, revealing small arms, thin and stiff like dry sticks. Her body was cold, almost weightless. He pulled her out gently, laying her on his coat. Her eyes were half closed. They flickered weakly, fading like dying stars. Come on, he muttered. Don't quit on me. He pressed two fingers to her neck. Faint, a pulse. Still alive, barely. Jalen grabbed his canteen and poured a drop on her lips. She didn't move. He poured more, rubbing her throat to help her swallow. Her skin felt fragile, as if it could crack open. The sun beat down harder. He knew staying here meant death for both of them. He lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost like carrying a bundle of cloth. Her head rolled against his shoulder. Hold on, he said, though she gave no answer. He stumbled back to his crawler and placed her in the passenger seat. Sand hissed as he climbed in and started the engine. The machine groaned, wheels biting into the dune. Behind them, the wind howled across the place where she had been buried, quickly erasing every trace. Jalen kept glancing at her. Her chest rose only a little. The glow in her eyes grew weaker with every bump in the road. You're not dying here, he said under his breath. Not on my watch. The desert stretched out like an ocean of fire, but he pushed the crawler faster. Inside her fading mind, the alien girl floated in darkness. She thought she was dreaming. She saw a figure of light bending over her. A human, not one of the ones who hated her, not the ones who called her broken. She wanted to speak, to tell him her name, but her mouth would not move. The darkness pulled her deeper. Jalen reached his small desert outpost, a shelter built from old ship parts and solar panels. He carried her inside and laid her on the metal table. He grabbed an old med kit from the wall, hands trembling. Her skin was cold. Too cold. Stay, he whispered, as if speaking to a flame about to go out. He opened a pack of thermal gel and rubbed it on her chest and arms. He placed a heat blanket over her. The scanner beeped weakly. Her heart rate was like a fading drum. Her lips parted just a little. A soft sound escaped, not human words, just a broken whisper like wind on glass. Jalen froze. She was trying to speak. Don't talk, he said quickly. Save your strength. Her glowing eyes opened for 1 second. She looked straight at him, afraid, confused, and still fighting to live. Then her body went still. The scanner gave one long, flat tone. No, Jalen breathed. He grabbed the shock injector and pressed it to her chest. The machine hissed. Her body jolted once. For a terrible second, nothing happened. Then her chest rose sharply. Her eyes flashed bright like tiny stars. Jalen let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "You're alive," he whispered. Outside, the desert wind howled louder, as if warning him that this was only the beginning. Jalen's crawler rolled to a stop outside his small desert outpost. The structure stood crooked against the endless dunes, walls made of rusted ship metal, patched solar panels glinting weakly under the sun. The wind screamed as if trying to tear it down. Inside the cabin, the alien girl lay still. Her glowing eyes had dimmed to soft embers. Jalen looked at her again, afraid she would stop breathing at any moment. "Stay with me," he whispered as he jumped out of the crawler. He opened the heavy door and hurried inside, his boots clanging on the metal floor. The air smelled of oil and dust. The shelter was small, just one main room with a cot, a table, and shelves stacked with old scavenged tech. He returned to the crawler and carried her inside carefully, as if she were made of glass. She was light as paper, her head rolling limply against his arm. Jalen laid her on the metal table and turned on the heater unit. Warm air hummed to life, filling the cold silence. He wrapped her in a thermal blanket and started his old medical scanner. The screen blinked with weak lines. Heartbeat faint, breathing shallow. "She's alive." "Barely," he muttered to himself. He opened a vial of hydration serum and injected a small dose into her arm. Her skin shimmered faintly where the needle touched, like moonlight rippling on water. "Strange," he said softly, almost in awe. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her fingers twitched. Jalen froze. "Hey, you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered half open, glowing faintly like dying stars. She made a soft sound. A fragile hum, not words. "It's okay," Jalen said gently, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe now." She flinched at his voice and tried to push herself away. Her weak arms slipped and she collapsed back, trembling. "Easy, easy," he said, placing a soft cloth behind her head. "I'm not like them. I won't hurt you." Her eyes narrowed. She didn't understand his words, but she stared at his face as if searching for truth. Jalen stood still, letting her see he carried no weapon. Slowly, he offered her a small piece of dry ration bar. She sniffed it, hesitated, then took a tiny bite. Her sharp teeth flashed for a moment. "Good," Jalen said, giving a small smile. She stared at him for a long time, blinking slowly. Then she whispered something, soft, broken syllables that sounded like glass bells cracking. He didn't understand. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, same to you." For the first time, her eyes softened a little. That night, the wind outside grew wild. Sand rattled against the walls like dry bones. Inside the outpost, the only light came from the heater's orange glow. The alien girl curled under the blanket on the table, her small body shaking. Jalen sat nearby on a crate, sharpening a dull knife out of habit. He kept glancing at her. She was so fragile, and yet, something about her felt powerful, like a storm waiting inside a glass bottle. Suddenly, a distant howl echoed through the desert. Jalen froze. It wasn't the wind. He stood and checked the sensors on the wall. Movement detected, shapes circling just beyond the outer dunes. Predators, Jalen swore under his breath, of all nights. He grabbed his old rifle from the rack and loaded a shell. He didn't want to fight, but if those creatures smelled weakness, they would come. He looked back at her. She was awake now, glowing eyes wide with fear. She had heard the howl too. "Stay quiet," he whispered. She clutched the edge of the blanket, trembling. Jalen moved to the window slit and scanned the darkness. Shadows slithered between the dunes, glowing eyes blinking like coals. Then from behind him a soft hand touched his wrist. He turned. The alien girl was standing, weak but upright. Her small hand gripped his arm. "Don't," she whispered in her broken voice. "Danger, follow me," Jalen blinked. She had spoken his language, barely but enough. "You mean they're here because of you?" he asked. She nodded slowly, her eyes dim with guilt. Jalen lowered his rifle. He should have felt afraid. Instead, he felt something else. Anger at whoever had thrown her out here like garbage. "Then we'll make them regret coming," he said. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the fire in his eyes. Hours passed. The predators circled outside but never attacked. Eventually, the howls faded into the distance and the desert went silent again. Jalen locked the door and returned to her side. She had fallen asleep at last, curled like a child, the glow in her eyes now soft and calm. He sat back, exhausted, his mind spun with questions. Who was she? Why had they left her to die? Why risk his life for her? He didn't know the answers. He only knew one thing. She was alive because of him now, and he was no longer alone in the desert. Outside, the wind shifted softly, carrying away the old silence and leaving behind something new. Fragile, uncertain but alive. Morning came with a soft golden glow across the desert. Thin light slipped through the cracks in Jalen's outpost walls. The storm had passed. The air was quiet again, almost too quiet. Jalen sat at the small table eating from a tin of cold beans. He kept watching the alien girl sleeping on the cot. Her breathing was stronger now. Her color had returned slightly, though her skin still looked fragile, almost translucent. She stirred, eyes blinking open. The faint glow inside them flickered brighter for a moment, like stars waking. "Morning," Jalen said gently. "You made it through the night." She looked at him, blinking slowly, not understanding his words. Still, she pushed herself to sit up, wrapping the blanket around her thin shoulders. He offered her a cup of water. She hesitated, then took it with both hands, sipping carefully. "Good." Jalen nodded. "You're stronger today." She tilted her head as if trying to study his sounds. Then she whispered, "Stir." Jalen froze. She had copied him. "Yes," he said, smiling faintly. "Strong," she blinked. "Strong." The word came out broken but clear. Jalen chuckled softly. "Smart girl." Something changed in her face. The hard fear that had lived in her eyes since he found her softened just a little. Later, Jalen searched through his storage bins for old translation tech. He found a cracked wrist device with a half-dead battery. It had been built for mining crews who worked with alien traders long ago. He powered it up and strapped it gently to her thin arm. "Talk," he said, pointing to himself. "Jalen." She stared at him. "Jalen," he repeated, slower, tapping his chest. She blinked, then touched her own chest. "Sorry." The device crackled, repeating the sound. "Sorry," Jalen grinned. "Sorry." "Okay, that's your name." She nodded once, shy but firm. "Sorry," he repeated softly. "Nice to meet you." She tilted her head at him. The device caught his words, buzzed, and then said something garbled in her language. She gave a small laugh, a sharp bell-like sound. It was the first time he heard her laugh. For a moment, the outpost felt warmer. That night, while Sari rested, Jalen worked on repairing an old solar battery. Sparks danced from his tools. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something strange. Symbols. Faint glowing marks were appearing on the wall near where Sari lay sleeping. They danced like tiny fireflies. Lines, circles, flowing patterns of soft light. Jalen stood slowly, confused. He stepped closer. The symbols shifted, fading, then reappearing. They were coming from her eyes. Sari's half-open, glowing eyes were casting the shapes like a silent projector. The patterns twisted like flowing water, forming and breaking apart. Jalen stared, amazed. "What are you?" he whispered. As if hearing him, Sari opened her eyes fully. The symbols scattered like frightened birds. She gasped and sat up fast, clutching the blanket. Jalen raised his hands. "It's okay. It's okay." She looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to be there. "Safe," Jalen said slowly, placing a hand on his chest, then pointing to the floor. "Safe here," she hesitated. Then shaking, she crawled down from the cot and drew a line in the dust on the floor with her finger. A curve. Then a spiral. Then 3 sharp marks, a map. Jalen knelt beside her. "What is that?" She pointed far off to the west on the map. "Crash," she whispered. The translator cracked out a broken version of her word. "Ship." "Fall, burn." Jalen's stomach tightened. A crashed alien ship. She pointed to the other side of the map, where they were now, and made a slicing motion across her throat. "Danger," she said, her voice trembling. Jalen understood. Whoever buried her was still out there, and they wanted her dead. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why would they do that to you?" She hugged her knees, lowering her head. Her voice was barely a breath. "Different." The word hit like a stone. "Different. They had buried her alive because she was different." Jalen clenched his fists. He felt anger rise like heat in his chest. "You're not broken," he said. "You're alive. That's what matters." She looked at him quietly for a long time. Then slowly, She reached out her small hand and touched his arm. Safe, she whispered, trying to copy his word from earlier. Jalen smiled gently. Yes, safe. But the desert was not silent that night. While Sari slept, Jalen stepped outside to check the solar panels. He looked up at the stars stretching cold and sharp across the sky. Then he saw them. Tiny lights moving far on the horizon. Ships. Silent. Black shapes gliding low above the dunes, their lights blinking like cold eyes. Jalen's heart thudded. He rushed back inside, locking the door and turning off the lights. Inside, Sari's eyes flickered open. She saw the fear on his face and sat up quickly. What? She whispered. Someone's coming, Jalen said quietly. Your people? Her glow dimmed. She shook her head slowly, fear rising in her eyes. Finish, she said softly. Finish me. Jalen looked at her. A fragile child carrying something the world wanted erased. He tightened his grip on his old rifle. Not while I'm breathing, he said. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the fire in his voice, and for the first time she truly believed him. The desert sky burned red as the sun sank behind the dunes. Long shadows stretched like claws across the sand. The wind had gone still, and with it, all sound. Jalen stood on the roof of his outpost, holding a pair of old binoculars to his eyes. Far on the horizon, faint black shapes floated low above the dunes. Silent ships. They were closer than before. Inside, Sari sat curled on the floor, her glowing eyes dim with worry. She had seen the ships too. Her small hands were tight around the blanket as if it could protect her. They're coming for you, Jalen said quietly when he stepped down. She didn't reply. She just nodded slowly as if she had always known they would return. Why now? Jalen asked. Why not just leave you buried? Her voice was a whisper. They fear what I carry. Jalen frowned. What do you carry? Sari pressed her hand to her chest. Her eyes glimmered faintly. Seed, code, of before. Jalen didn't understand the full meaning, but her words felt heavy. Ancient. Dangerous. He moved quickly around the outpost, checking his traps and locking every door. The place was not meant for war. It was just scrap walls, old tools, and rusted machines. But Jalen had survived alone in this desert for years. He knew how to make something out of nothing. He dragged sheets of broken metal to cover the windows. He planted mines from old scavenger stock under the sand outside. Sari watched silently as he worked. She looked so small in the corner, like a piece of the night that had gotten lost. You don't have to fight, she said softly. The translator on her wrist buzzed to repeat her words. Jalen paused. Yes, I do. Why? She asked, confused. I am. Not yours, he looked at her. Because you should have been someone's. Because no one should be left alone in the sand. Her lips trembled, and for a second her glow brightened. As night fell, the ships drew nearer. Their lights flickered like cold stars weaving silently across the dunes. Jalen led Sari to a hatch in the floor. A narrow tunnel ran beneath the outpost, an old mining shaft he had once used to store supplies. If they break in, you go down here, he said. Sari shook her head. We in together? He gave a small smile. Fine, together. He handed her a small flare stick. She held it tight, though her hands were trembling. The first ship landed just after midnight. The ground shook as its heavy frame touched the sand. Dust rolled over the outpost like a wave. Jalen crouched at the window slit. Tall figures stepped out wearing bone-white armor that gleamed under the stars. Their faces were hidden behind black masks. They moved like shadows, silent and fast. Sari's whole body stiffened. Clan, she whispered. Jalen's jaw clenched. They spread around the outpost, carrying long spears that hummed with crackling energy. One of them knelt, touching the sand where Jalen had dragged Sari earlier. He spoke into a device in a low, sharp language. Jalen pulled Sari down under the window. They're scanning, he whispered. She nodded, her glow fading almost to nothing, trying to hide it. A beam of red light swept across the walls. The traps outside clicked softly. Then the door boomed. A spear of white energy burned through the metal, slicing it like paper. Down, Jalen hissed. They dove through the hatch just as the door exploded inward. Shards of metal flew across the room. They slid down the narrow tunnel, sand pouring after them. Above, heavy boots thudded on the floor. Voices barked sharp commands. Jalen grabbed her hand as they ran through the darkness. "Keep going," he said. Behind them, another explosion roared. The tunnel shook, spraying dirt. They reached an old storage cavern lit only by the dim glow of Sari's eyes. Jalen pushed a crate against the entrance to block the tunnel. They both collapsed, gasping. "Why? Bury you, then come back?" Jalen asked between breaths. Sari rested her head against the wall, tears glowing on her cheeks. "They called me defect, but I hold the core, the old memory of our first world. They fear it," Jalen stared. "You mean your whole history? Your people's past?" She nodded. "Inside me, in my blood." Jalen felt a chill. He finally understood. They hadn't just buried a child. They had tried to erase their own past, and now they had come to finish the job. Far above them, boots thudded across Jalen's outpost. The hunters tore through his things, smashing and scanning, searching for any sign of her. The ground trembled with their machines. Jalen checked his old rifle. "Only 4 shots left. We can't stay here," he said quietly. "Where go?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "The dunes. Hide in the storm valleys. I know the paths." Sari looked at him, fear and trust battling in her eyes. "Okay," she whispered. The night was black and sharp like broken glass. Cold wind whipped across the dunes as Jalen and Sari slipped out from the hidden cavern. Their boots sank into soft sand. Every step felt too loud. Behind them, the horizon still glowed faint red from the hunters' landing lights. The outpost was gone. Silent, dark, torn apart by strangers. Jalen glanced at Sari. She moved close beside him, clutching a small bundle of gear he had given her. The wind pushed her thin cloak like wings. "We keep moving," Jalen whispered. She nodded, though fear trembled in her glowing eyes. They climbed over tall dunes until the lights of the hunters faded behind them. The desert stretched wide and endless, silver under the moon. Jalen stopped and scanned the horizon with his old scope. Nothing, only wind. He let them rest for a moment, crouching behind a dune. He gave her water from his flask. She drank in tiny sips, careful not to waste even a drop. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She blinked at him, not understanding, but gave a small nod. "Good," he said, though he knew they were far from safe. As they walked again, Sari spoke in a quiet voice. "The hunters. They do not stop. They follow heat. And blood," Jalen frowned. "So they can track you?" She touched her chest. "The seed, it glows. They can feel it." Jalen's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then we hide your glow." He stopped and took out a roll of dull black cloth from his pack. He wrapped it gently around her arms and torso, covering her faint light. Sari stood still, letting him. She looked like a tiny shadow now, her glow hidden under layers. "Better," he said. Her voice was soft. "You protect me." "Someone has to," Jalen replied. They moved into a wide basin where tall dunes curled like frozen waves. The wind was stronger here, blowing sheets of sand across the ground. But Jalen felt something wrong. The air was too still under the wind's howl. He raised his hand, stopping Sari. "Wait." Then he saw it, half buried in the sand, a small black spike blinking red, a tracker beacon. His stomach dropped. "Run!" Sari didn't question. They ran. The sand erupted behind them with a flash of white light. Energy spears slammed into the ground, throwing up geysers of fire and sand. The night exploded in sound. Jalen pushed Sari down behind a dune. A spear struck the crest, blowing sand over them like a wave. The hunters had been waiting. Figures rose from the dunes, tall shapes in white armor, their eyes glowing cold blue. They moved fast, silent, closing from both sides. Jalen fired his rifle. The shot cracked through the air, striking one hunter in the chest. The figure spun back and vanished into the dark. "Go!" he shouted. Sari ran low and fast, her feet barely touching the sand. A spear slashed past her shoulder, burning a hole in her cloak. She gasped but kept moving. Jalen fired again, covering her. Sparks flew as a hunter's spear hit the rocks near him. He ducked, rolled, and fired his last shot. Another hunter dropped into the sand. "Out," Jalen hissed. The rifle clicked empty. He drew his old combat knife and ran after her. They reached the edge of the basin where tall stone ridges jutted from the sand like broken teeth. "Up there," Jalen shouted. Sari scrambled up the rocks, pulling herself with small hands. Jalen followed, his boots slipping. Behind them, a hunter leapt from the sand, spear raised. Jalen spun and slammed his knife into the figure's leg. The hunter crashed down, hissing like a broken machine. But another spear struck the rocks beside Jalen, exploding in white fire. The blast threw him into the stone. Pain ripped through his side. He tumbled down the slope, sand filling his mouth. "Jalen!" Sari screamed. She ran back, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. He forced himself up, coughing blood. "Go! Keep going!" "No," she said fiercely, her voice shaking. "Not without you." The hunters closed in. 3 of them, moving like ghosts through the firelit sand. Jalen stood in front of her, swaying, knife in hand. Then Sari did something he did not expect. She stepped in front of him. Her eyes flared bright like twin suns. Light burst from her body, pure, white and burning. The hunters froze, blinded. Their spears hummed and cracked, shorting out in their hands. Sari screamed, the sound ringing like crystal shattering. The hunters stumbled back, shielding their faces. Jalen grabbed her, pulling her away before she collapsed from the effort. They fled into the rocks as the blinded hunters roared behind them. They didn't stop until they were deep inside a narrow canyon. The wind howled overhead, hiding their tracks. Jalen collapsed against the wall, blood soaking his side. His breathing was ragged. Sari knelt beside him, glowing faintly again, tears streaking her dusty face. "You hurt," she whispered. "I'll live," he muttered. She placed her glowing hands over his wound. Warm light seeped into his skin. The pain eased, but her glow dimmed further. "Don't waste it," he said weakly. She shook her head. "I will not lose you." Above the canyon, the hunters' ships circled like dark vultures. They had failed to kill her tonight, but they were not gone, and Jalen knew they would return, with fire enough to burn the whole desert. The canyon was silent. Only the sound of dripping water echoed faintly from the stone walls. Moonlight slipped through the cracks above, painting silver lines across the rough ground. Jalen lay propped against the wall, pale and sweating. Blood had soaked through his shirt and dried into dark crust. His breathing came slow and heavy, like an old machine trying to keep running. Sari sat beside him, her knees pulled close, eyes glowing faint and tired. Her hands trembled from what she had done, burning her own lifelight to blind the hunters. But she didn't care about her fading glow. She only looked at him. "Jalen," she whispered. His eyes opened halfway. "Still here," he muttered, voice rough. "Told you. I'm hard to kill," she frowned. "You are not hard. You are soft." Despite the pain, he gave a weak laugh. "Fair point." Then he winced, pressing his hand to his bleeding side. Sari's glow brightened slightly. She crawled closer and touched his chest. "I fix you," she said softly. Jalen caught her wrist gently. "No, you're weak. You'll burn yourself out." She shook her head hard. "I will not lose you." Before he could argue, she placed both her small hands on his wound. Light spilled from her palms like liquid stars. It flowed into his torn flesh, warm and soft, not burning but filling. The pain dulled, fading like mist under the sun. Jalen gasped as he felt his heartbeat steady. His body relaxed for the first time in hours. Sari closed her eyes, focusing. Her lips moved in a strange rhythm, soft words in her language like singing made of broken glass. The glow around her grew brighter, but he could see it draining her. Her shoulders shook. "Enough," he whispered. "You'll hurt yourself." She opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "I hurt if you die." The words hit him deeper than the wound ever could. Minutes passed. When she finally pulled her hands away, her glow dimmed almost to nothing. She slumped against him, breathing hard. Jalen touched his side. The bleeding had stopped. The wound had sealed, leaving only faint scar lines. He stared at her. "You saved me." Sari blinked sleepily. "We save each other." Jalen let out a shaky breath and wrapped his arm gently around her shoulders. She curled against his chest like a tired child. For a long time, they just sat there breathing the same slow rhythm, listening to each other's hearts. Later, when the pain had eased and her glow had returned slightly, they made a small campfire from dry roots Jalen had hidden in the canyon. The flames flickered warm orange. painting the stone walls like old memories. Sari sat close to the fire, holding her hands out to the heat. She looked calm for the first time since he had found her. Jalen watched her quietly. "You're stronger than they ever knew," he said softly. She tilted her head. "They feared me, called me defect. I was alone." "You're not alone now," he said. Her eyes shimmered. "You stay?" "As long as it takes," Jalen said without hesitation. Something shifted in her then. The fear in her face melted like frost in sunlight. They spent the night talking in broken pieces of language. The translator on her wrist buzzed softly, helping fill the gaps. Jalen pointed at the fire. "Fire, fire," she repeated carefully. He touched his chest. "Heart," she copied him. "Heart." Then she touched his chest gently with one finger. "Your heart." "Strong," Jalen smiled. "Beats for 2 now." Sari didn't fully understand, but she smiled too. Before sleeping, Jalen showed her the old star map stored in his wrist tablet. Faint glowing dots floated on the cracked screen. "These are places I've never seen," he said. "Out there no one knows you. No one hates you." Sari touched one of the stars on the screen with wonder. "Safe," she whispered. "Maybe," Jalen said. "We just have to get you far enough away." Her glowing eyes reflected the starlight. "We," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes," he said softly. "We." She slept curled beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. Her glow was soft and steady again. Jalen stayed awake, staring at the fire as it faded to embers. His body ached, but his mind was calm for the first time in days. He had no plan, no map, no allies. But he had something new, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. At dawn, pale gold light spilled into the canyon. The wind had gone still and the desert was quiet again. Jalen stood, testing his side. It hurt, but it held. Sari stirred awake and looked up at him. "We go," he nodded. "We go." She smiled, small and tired, but real, and as they climbed out of the canyon together, footprints side by side, the sun rose behind them like a promise. The sun rose like fire over the dunes, turning the cold desert gold. Wind swept across the sand, hiding every footprint from the night before. Jalen and Sari walked side by side, their shadows stretching long behind them. Jalen's wound was closed, but his steps were slow. Sari stayed close, ready to catch him if he stumbled. Her glow was stronger again, steady and calm. They had escaped the hunters, but Jalen knew they weren't gone. They were just waiting. By midday, they reached the Skeleton Valley, a place of giant broken stone towers buried half under the sand. Old mining ruins lay scattered like bones. Jalen climbed a fallen pillar and scanned the horizon. The sky was too quiet, too empty. "They'll come soon," he muttered. Sari stood below, her eyes glowing faint in the shadow of the ruins. "They will not stop." "No," Jalen said. "But we can." He climbed down and opened his pack, laying out what was left of his gear: 3 old explosive charges, a coil of det cord, and a cracked detonator. Sari watched silently. "We'll lure them here," he explained. "Blow their main ship while they hunt us." She tilted her head. "Risk? Yeah," Jalen said. "But it's the only way they'll stop." Sari stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "We do this. Together." "Together," he agreed. As night fell, they set the traps. Jalen planted the charges deep under the sand at the base of the stone towers. He ran the wires to the ruins where they could hide. Sari stood watch, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Her hands shook, but her face was calm. When he was done, they sat together in silence, waiting. The stars came out sharp and cold above them. The desert felt like it was holding its breath. Then, faint on the wind, came the low hum of engines. Sari's glow brightened. "They come." Lights appeared on the horizon, floating low over the dunes like ghost fires. Jalen's heart thudded. Right on time, the hunters' ships glided into the valley, silent and black. Dust swirled under their thrusters. They landed in a circle, surrounding the ruins. Tall, armored figures stepped out, their cold blue eyes glowing under the moon. Their energy spears hissed like snakes. Sari stood in the open, small and still, her cloak fluttering in the wind. The hunters froze when they saw her. One spoke in their sharp language. The others moved forward, Jalen whispered from the shadows. Just a little closer. The hunters closed around her. Sari's eyes blazed. She raised her hands, and the glowing symbols burst into the air around her like falling stars. The hunters stumbled, shielding their faces. Their scanners screamed warnings. In that chaos, Jalen pressed the detonator. The valley exploded. Fire ripped through the sand. The charges blew the stone towers apart, collapsing them onto the ships. Flames and dust swallowed the hunters as metal screamed and shattered. Sari fell to her knees from the shockwave. Jalen ran to her, grabbing her hand and pulling her back as fire rolled across the ruins. They dove behind a stone slab as another blast shook the ground. When the dust cleared, the hunters' ships were twisted wrecks. Black smoke curled into the stars. The hunters who survived staggered, weapons broken, armor cracked. They saw Sari standing with Jalen beside her, alive, glowing, unbroken. Fear flickered in their cold eyes, and they fled into the desert, disappearing like ghosts. Silence fell over the ruins. Sari stood still, trembling, staring at the wreckage of the ones who had buried her. "They are gone," she whispered. "For good," Jalen said. She turned to him slowly. "You had stayed. Always," he said simply. Her lips curved into a small, real smile, the first one without fear. They spent the night among the ruins, watching the fire burn out. Jalen patched the last cuts on his arms while Sari sat beside him, tracing patterns in the sand with her finger. "What now?" she asked quietly. Jalen looked up at the stars. "Now we stop running. We build something. Home?" she said as if testing the word. "Home," he said. By dawn, the wind had buried the wreckage under soft dunes. The desert had already begun to erase the battle. Jalen and Sari stood at the edge of the valley, packs on their backs, the rising sun at their faces. She looked at him. "Together," she said firmly. He smiled. "Together." They walked out of the ruins side by side, their footprints winding across the golden sand. And behind them, the desert whispered, not with silence anymore, but with the echo of two beating hearts.